I recently received a question from somebody. They were very interested in Ayurveda. They know that it can be helpful. They'd had some positive experiences with it in the past. And yet they were caught up in a belief that it was very complicated and required a lot of effort and felt like a bunch of, quote, rules that they found themselves, quote, failing at. And this is something that I've heard before. I believe once upon a time when I very first began my journey into this world, I felt the same way. So today I am going to answer this question and share what I shared with this person who eventually became a client and is having some really wonderful results in their life. So, for starters, welcome. I'm Devon, and I am delighted to have this new series on the podcast where I will be answering questions. It's one of my most favorite things to do, so that's what we're going to do. And if you have any that you would like for me to address, send them my way. So for today, this inaugural episode, we're going to discuss what Ayurveda actually is. Okay, in a nutshell, right? In a brief Q&A episode. So many people approach healing modalities in general, regardless of what they are, the way that they were taught to approach everything else in our modern Western world. So we were taught to perform, to get it right, to follow rules, to optimize and be good enough. And so naturally, we're going to take that style of thinking and that approach and then put it on anything that we're trying in life, whether it's Ayurveda or it's learning a new hobby, right? Like you want to start crocheting or knitting, you're going to be like, I need to get this right. And you're going to like try to perform. So that's conditioning. That's not necessarily Ayurveda or crocheting or knitting or anything else that you might be getting into. You're superimposing conditioning and this kind of lens on top of that. So naturally, things are going to feel more effortful than they are. Now, that's not to say that learning something new and making some behavior changes, some diet, some lifestyle changes isn't going to require effort, isn't going to feel a little bit wonky at first. It's new, right? Look at a baby learning to walk. They're very wonky. And then they get it. Then they're running and it's just second nature. So let's talk about briefly what Ayurveda actually is. It is not a rule book. Let's start with looking at what it is not, addressing this person's question specifically. So it is not a rule book. It is not a rigid system to follow. It is not something to do or to try. It is not a diet. It is an invitation into a deeper and more meaningful relationship with reality, period. And the way that it is often presented in mainstream culture is painfully incomplete. Painfully incomplete. It tends to, again, follow the kind of mainstream narrative and conditioning and views that we have about other things, the way that we approach other things. And so as a result, we then superimpose that onto Ayurveda. And so the way that it's kind of presented in the mainstream narrative is it overemphasizes the physical body while neglecting the mind and the spirit and the emotions. And without that, those are the most important pieces of this beautiful system because those subtle aspects create our experience and create our existence. And Ayurveda is a completely holistic approach to living where we get to learn and grow. And so that's what makes Ayurveda what it is. And without that component, it does just become another thing, another trend, another set of rules. And that's not what it is. It is based on guidelines and invitations that are rooted in the unchanging principles of nature. So, for example, water is wet. It will always be wet. It doesn't matter what some influencer is doing today or what the trend of the week is, these unchanging principles of nature. So it's based on that. It's based on thousands of years of observing cause and effect. So when I do X, I get Y. If I want to change Y, then I must change X. So things like food lists and dosha quizzes and rigid frameworks can be interesting and maybe helpful, but they're really incomplete and ineffective when they are relied on too heavily and when they are taken out of context of the bigger picture. And so as a result, those tools may actually be taking us further away from ourselves and our wholeness and true understanding. So essentially, Ayurveda teaches us to know ourselves, our place in the universe, and to harmonize our inner and outer worlds through coming to understand the root of the imbalances that lead to the symptoms and the dis-ease that we experience in our mind and body, because it's all one. It's a way of taking radical self-responsibility and practicing radical self-acceptance by working with what we've been given, right? The unique system that I'm in this life is different from yours. Sometimes I wish maybe, we're a little different, but we work with what we have been given. And with what we've been given, we've got a lot to learn and a lot of room to grow and become our fullest potential. So it's about overcoming the mental and emotional blocks that we encounter to that acceptance and that responsibility along the way. And it's a really beautiful system and a way of living and viewing yourself and reality. So you can see that it goes way beyond just a diet and a set of rules, a set of frameworks. And so this person was also interested in, I took a dosha quiz and it said this, and I'm going to talk about that later in a different episode, but we each have an innate constitution, and that's what I mean by what we've been given, working with what we've been given. So knowing that we have certain tendencies and working with that. And, lastly, why things can feel effortful. Again, that's conditioning, and common wellness advice and normalized mainstream habits are pretty juxtaposed to everything I was just saying that Ayurveda is, right? So like slowing down and doing things differently can feel a little bit effortful, to use this person's words. But when we realize that something has to change and that our system is talking to us, we can ask ourselves if we want to be right, feel right, or if we want to feel well. Because when things are feeling effortful, even though we're making steps to something that we know is ultimately in our best interest, that's the false ego coming up with some pretty convincing stories to defend itself and defend those imbalances that start to take on a life of their own. You know what I mean? So those bad habits that we have that are causing negative reactions, negative results, we are so attached to them, even when they're causing us suffering. Yeah. So that's like that false ego really being attached. So it's going to feel extra challenging at first to get some momentum going in the other way. Because right now there's all that momentum built up in support of these current ways that are not supporting your wholeness and your well-being. So again, lastly, because we could talk about this forever, and I have so many full-on episodes on my podcast and articles in my blog and lots of resources about this, but at its heart, Ayurveda is simple. It is so simple. It is like almost painfully simple. And our little minds and our false egos want to make things complicated because, again, that conditioning, things have to be complicated for them to be worthwhile or for them to be, I don't know. Our minds are crazy. I'm not going to try to pretend that I understand the inner workings of these things. So Ayurveda at its heart is an invitation into simplicity, harmony, and balance. And it makes everything just make sense. It just makes sense. That's one of my favorite things about it. It's one of my favorite things about educating people is just seeing these kind of light bulb moments for them when they're like, oh wow, that's like literally the first thing I've ever heard that makes sense. And these are people that have studied things or, been on healing journeys for a long time. And they're just like, yeah, wow, that makes sense. So it emphasizes consistency and daily, gentle stabilization and practices that are rooted in nature's rhythms. And they are gentle and applicable to everyone, everywhere, at all times. So, emphasizing things like warm, regular meals, regular rhythms of eating, sleeping, working, and recreating, optimizing digestion of food and life. Yeah, digestion is so much more than just what comes in the mouth and comes back out the bottom. We need to digest life and our experiences. And it again invites us into self responsibility, self acceptance, self awareness, and really that sense of consistency in knowing ourselves and being with our ever evolving, ever expanding essence on a daily basis over any type of perfection or performance. So, if that sounds like something you'd like to experience in your life, then Ayurveda is where it's at. I mean, for sure. So let's ditch the other type of thinking. And if it has felt overwhelming or scary or confusing, maybe the invitation is to stop trying to approach it like a thing to master or perform or to do, and to start letting it teach you how to be in life. So that's what I have for that answer today. If you would like help understanding what balance looks like in your unique system, then I offer private one-on-one sessions and you can explore more of that and how to work with me, as well as more resources, articles, blog articles, podcast episodes, all the things at innerspark.life. And I will see you next time.